Section we talked about was about congruent figures. The second section we're talking about is isosceles and equilateral triangles. What's an isosceles triangle?
Like the thing where it has one 90-degree angle.
No. Two sides are the same. Two sides are the same for an isosceles triangle. What's an equilateral triangle? All sides are the same. All three sides are the same. Okay, so here's two sides of an isosceles triangle that are the same. So if we draw a line that splits this evenly and fold this over, what can I say about angles C and A? They're congruent. So what we call angles C and A are base angles. These are base angles, and base angles of an isosceles triangle are congruent. Okay? Base angles are opposite the two congruent sides. Okay? Base angles are opposite the two congruent sides. So, if you have two congruent sides, then your base angles will be congruent. If you have two congruent base angles, then you're going to have two sides be congruent. That's the isosceles triangle theorem. Okay, the isosceles triangle theorem. If two sides are congruent, then the angles opposite those sides will be congruent to each other. If two angles are congruent, then the sides opposite those two angles will be congruent to each other. So, here's a little picture. You got North 1st Street, South 1st Street, and Park Plaza. What are angles? How big are angles E and F? How big are angles E and F? Well, to figure that out, okay, we know these two sides are congruent, and this is a 50-degree angle right over here. How many degrees are in a triangle? 180. So if you take 180 minus the 50 degrees that we already have had, 130 is shared between those two angles. If you take 130 and divide by the number of angles they're shared by, what do we get?
65.
So each angle there is 65 degrees. Angles E and F are both going to be 65 degrees. So if angle A is 28 degrees, how do we figure out B and C? Well, take 180 and do what with the 28? Subtract it. So we get 152 degrees. And then with 152, we divide by 2 to get 76 degrees. So both angles B and C will be 76 degrees. If these two angles are congruent, which two sides are congruent? P and R, PR and QR, PQ and RQ, or PQ and PR? Which? PR and QR are the sides opposite of the two congruent angles. So x plus 20 equals 8x over 3. Now, how many people in here just love to work with fractions? Yeah, I didn't see any hands go up. Okay? Most of you guys don't like working with fractions. So let's not work with fractions. Let's get rid of it. How can I get rid of this fraction? By multiplying both sides by 3. Gets rid of the fraction. So 3x plus 60 equals 8x. And then what do we do to both sides? Subtract 3x. So 60 equals 5x. Divide by 5. X equals 12. If we plug that in, this side is 12 plus 20, or 32. 12 times 8 is 96, divided by 3 is 32. Okay, here we go. Oh, We can figure out what this side is too. 6 times 12 is 72 minus 12 is 60. Okay. It says find the perimeter of this. This is 132. This is 24. What's left for this angle? Well, what's 132 plus 24? 156. What's 180 minus 156? 24. What type of a triangle do I have? Isosceles. This and this are going to be congruent. So 2x plus 15 is equal to 4x minus 5. Subtract 2x from each side. 15 equals 2x minus 5. What do we do to each side? Add 5. 20 equals 2x. Divide by 2. X equals 10. So 2 times 10 is 20 plus 15 is 35. 4 times 10 is 40 minus 5 is 35. 4 times 10 is 40 plus 12 is 52. 35 and 35 make 70 plus 52 is 122 is the perimeter. Okay. All right. If you draw a perpendicular bisector in an isosceles triangle, it'll hit the midpoint of the opposite side. Okay? So if you draw an angle, I should have said, if you draw an angle bisector to the vertex of the angle in between the two congruent sides, it'll become a perpendicular bisector. It'll hit the midpoint of the opposite side and it'll be perpendicular. Okay? So the angle bisector, the vertex angle, is the perpendicular bisector. So a prefabricated house is delivered to a site. So when they have prefabricated houses, sometimes you see them going down the interstate, where there's a half of the house behind one semi, and a little while later there's another half of the house, and then they just put them together. Okay? When the truck is hauling that house, it must pass under a bridge that has a clearance of 17 feet. Should the trucker plan to take a different route, or can he make it there? Okay? Can he make it under that bridge? Well, if it's 10 feet here, okay, how many feet is it here? Well, if it's 24 feet here, this is 14, and this is 14, because this is an isosceles triangle, so it's listed at its midpoint. If I know two sides of a triangle, how do I find the third side of a right triangle? If this is 16 and this is 14, how do I figure out this side? Use the Pythagorean theorem. C squared equals A squared plus B squared. C squared, 16 squared equals X squared plus 14 squared. 16 squared is what? 256? X squared, 14 squared is 196. So if we subtract, we get 60. Am I right? Take square root. It's 7 point something, right? 7 point what? 7.7. So this is 7.7. This is 10. What's 10 plus 7.7? 17.7 feet. Should the trucker take a different way? Yeah, because he's going to bang the top of that house. There's going to be a major accident at that bridge if he tries to go under that 17-foot bridge. Things does not look pretty. Okay, equilateral triangles, they're even easier to work with. Equilateral triangles are super easy to work with. Why? Because all the sides are the same. So what about all the angles? They're going to be the same. If they're all the same, how many degrees are they? No, they add up to 180. How much are each of them? 60. Because 3 60-degree angles make 180. So they're all 60 degrees. So 60 degrees, 60 degrees, 60 degrees. You got to know that. Okay, remember that. Keep that in your brains. Okay, if angle CBD is 130 degrees, what's this angle up here? Basically, I want to know what are all the angles here. Well, we start with our equilateral triangle. What's each angle in there? 60, 60, and 60. They say CBD is 130. What's left for angle B? ABD. That is 70, right? Because this angle CBD is 130, so that has to be 70. That's 60. If this is 70 and this is equilateral, or isosceles, those two have to be the same. So you take 180 minus 70. What are you left with? 110 divided by 2 is 55. So this is 55 and this is 55. So BAD is 55 degrees. If I would ask you what's CAD, how big is CAD? How big is CAD? CAD. How big is that? 60 plus 55 is 105. 100. What? 115. 150. Yeah, 115. Miss Beers, I can't do math. Okay. Isosceles triangles. If these sides are congruent, then the opposite angles are congruent. If these angles are congruent, then the opposite sides are congruent. Okay? And a perpendicular bisector splits this in half. An angle bisector makes this a perpendicular bisector. They're all one and the same. And equilateral triangle is also equiangular. All right.